I never thought I'd wake up in a hospital bed, unable to move or speak, yet fully able to hear my own children planning my demise. Let her go, Charlotte told the doctor while Richard nodded. Mom wouldn't want to live like this. They had no idea I could hear every word. 3 months later, I walked out of rehab on my own 2 feet. The first thing I did, changed my will and confronted my betrayers. Before I tell you my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button if you want to hear how I reclaimed my life after the ultimate betrayal. Before my stroke, I was Dorothy Wilson, a vibrant 65-year-old retired high school English teacher with silver-streaked brown hair and more energy than women half my age. My husband George and I had built a beautiful life together during our 40 years of marriage. He was my rock, my confidant, and my best friend. We'd planned our golden years meticulously, traveling, gardening, spending time with grandchildren. But 3 years ago, George lost his battle with pancreatic cancer, leaving me to navigate this chapter alone. George and I had raised 3 children together. Charlotte, our eldest at 38, had always been the ambitious one. From the moment she could speak, she knew exactly what she wanted and how to get it. She became a corporate lawyer at a prestigious firm in Boston, married Victor, another attorney, and gave us our first grandchild, Abigail, now 10. Charlotte's life was a carefully constructed image of success. The corner office, the colonial house in the suburbs, the private school for Abigail. She managed her life with the same precision she applied to her legal briefs. Richard, our middle child at 35, had inherited his father's entrepreneurial spirit, but none of his business sense. He'd started and failed at 3 different ventures before opening a sports equipment store that was perpetually about to turn the corner. He and his wife Elizabeth had 7-year-old twins, Benjamin and Brian. Despite his financial struggles, Richard maintained an expensive lifestyle, frequently asking for loans that we all knew would never be repaid. Then there was Emily, my youngest at 32. She'd always been the family empath, the one who'd bring home stray animals and befriend the kids nobody talked to at school. She became a social worker, dedicating her life to helping foster children find permanent homes. Emily lived across the country in Oregon, single and married to her work. Her salary was modest, but her life was rich with purpose. After George died, I threw myself into community activities to keep loneliness at bay. I became president of the local book club, organized the community garden project, and volunteered at the hospital where George had spent his final days. My calendar was always full: bridge on Tuesdays, book club on Thursdays, garden committee on Saturdays. I refused to become the stereotypical lonely widow. Financially, I was comfortable. Our house was paid off, we had substantial savings, and George's life insurance and pension provided steady income. I wasn't extravagant, but I enjoyed occasional small luxuries: theater tickets, dinners with friends, new plants for my garden. I'd worked hard my entire life and felt I deserved to enjoy the fruits of that labor. My doctor, Patricia Reynolds, had been warning me about my blood pressure for years. "Dorothy, you need to take this medication regularly," she'd say at my checkups. I'd nod, fill the prescription, and then forget to take it half the time. I felt fine, so why worry? In retrospect, that stubborn independence nearly cost me everything. The last family gathering before my stroke was Thanksgiving. I'd prepared George's traditional recipes: the cornbread stuffing, cranberry relish, and pumpkin cheesecake. Having everyone around my dining table felt right, even with the empty chair at the head where George should have been. That night, I noticed tension between my children. Charlotte kept steering the conversation toward my health, my house, my finances. "Mom, have you thought about downsizing?" she asked while serving dessert. "This house is too much for one person to maintain." "This house is full of memories," I replied. "I'm not going anywhere." Later, while I was in the kitchen, I overheard Charlotte and Richard talking in hushed tones. "She's not getting any younger," Charlotte said. "We need to start thinking about what happens with the house and accounts when she can't manage them anymore." "Mom's fine," Richard responded. "Besides, I could really use my share soon. The store needs new inventory if I'm going to compete with the big box retailers." I pretended not to hear, but their words stung. When had my children started seeing me as an asset rather than their mother? The memory of George's final days suddenly came to me. "Take care of yourself, Dot," he'd said, holding my hand with what little strength he had left. The kids might not. I dismissed his concerns then. George had always been protective, worrying about how I'd manage without him. Now I wondered if he'd seen something in our children that I'd been blind to. I was too proud to confront them or ask for help. Instead, I doubled down on my independence, refusing Charlotte's offers to help organize my finances, or Richard's suggestions to look at some retirement communities, just in case. I wasn't going to be managed or diminished. I had decades of living left to do, and I planned to do it on my terms. If only I'd known how quickly everything would change. The morning of my stroke began like any other Tuesday. I woke at 6, made myself a cup of Earl Grey tea, and sat at the kitchen table planning my day. The community garden needed spring bulbs planted, and I had lists of tulips and daffodils to purchase. The sun streamed through the kitchen windows, illuminating the photos of George and the children that lined my refrigerator. It was going to be a beautiful April day. I stood to rinse my cup when the dizziness hit. The room tilted sideways and my right arm suddenly felt heavy, unresponsive. I tried to call out, but my words came out garbled, as though my tongue had swollen to twice its size. A wave of confusion washed over me. What was happening? Through the fog, one clear thought emerged. Call 911. I stumbled to the phone on the counter, my right leg dragging behind me. With my left hand, I punched in the 3 numbers just before my legs gave way. As I slid to the floor, I heard a distant voice asking, 911, what's your emergency? I tried to respond, but only managed incomprehensible sounds before darkness engulfed me. My memories of the ambulance ride are fragmented flashing lights, the cold stethoscope on my chest, a paramedic named Jason repeatedly saying, "Stay with us, ma'am." I remember thinking about George, wondering if I was joining him sooner than expected. I briefly regained consciousness in the emergency room. Harsh fluorescent lights overhead, a doctor shining a penlight in my eyes, nurses efficiently connecting me to machines. Significant left hemisphere ischemic stroke, someone said. CT shows a large clot. Get her prepped for TPA immediately. The medical terminology washed over me as I drifted back into unconsciousness. The next 48 hours were a blur of semi-consciousness. I'd wake briefly, aware of tubes and beeping machines, before slipping away again. During one of these moments, I heard a doctor with a deep voice explaining my condition. The stroke affected the left side of her brain, which controls speech and movement on the right side of her body. We've administered clot-busting medication, but the extent of permanent damage is still uncertain. I wanted to tell them I could hear them, that I was still here, but my body refused to cooperate. I was trapped inside myself, a prisoner in my own flesh. A neurologist named Dr. Patterson became a regular presence. "Dorothy, can you squeeze my hand if you can hear me?" he would ask. I'd try with all my might, but could only manage the faintest pressure. "There's some response," he'd tell the nurses. "That's encouraging." The nurses became my lifeline to humanity. Linda, with her lilting Jamaican accent, would talk to me while changing my for or checking my vitals. "You're going to get through this, Dorothy. I've seen stronger recoveries from worse strokes." Carlos, the night nurse, would softly hum old Beatles songs as he worked, occasionally telling me about his children or his garden. "My tomatoes are coming in nicely," he said one night. "When you're better, I'll bring you some seeds from the best ones." Their kindness was a stark contrast to the cold terror I felt inside. Would I ever speak again? Walk again? Live independently? Or was this it? Trapped in a body that no longer obeyed my commands? The thought of spending years like this was unbearable. My children arrived the day after my stroke. Through half-closed eyes, I watched their reactions. Charlotte immediately took charge, cornering doctors for information, taking notes on her tablet, asking about prognosis and care options. Richard paced the room, alternating between looking distraught and checking his phone, as though torn between concern for me and whatever business crisis demanded his attention. Emily arrived last, having caught the first flight from Portland. She rushed to my bedside, tears streaming down her face, and took my hand. "I'm here, Mom," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." Dr. Patterson explained my condition using terms I struggled to follow in my foggy state. Aphasia, hemiparesis, cognitive impacts, rehabilitation potential. The words swirled around me, describing a stranger, not Dorothy Wilson who just yesterday had been planning her garden. The gravity of my situation slowly sank in. This wasn't a simple illness I'd bounce back from in a few days. This was potentially life-altering. Fear became my constant companion. Would I remain in this half-state forever? Would I become a burden to my children? What would happen to my home, my garden, my independence? The questions circled endlessly, with no answers forthcoming. In those early days, I experienced something I'd never known before: complete helplessness. I who had always prided myself on self-sufficiency now couldn't even ask for water when I was thirsty. The indignity of being cleaned and changed by strangers, of having decisions made about me without my input, was almost as devastating as the physical effects of the stroke. As my consciousness became more consistent, I realized something crucial. Though I couldn't respond, I could hear and understand everything happening around me. Every conversation, every medical discussion, every whispered comment. I was mentally present, trapped in a body that wouldn't respond. This realization was both a comfort and a curse, as I would soon discover. 10 days after my stroke, I was transferred to Riverside Rehabilitation Center, a sprawling facility 20 miles from my home. The ambulance ride was silent and lonely. Charlotte was in court, Richard claimed a business emergency, and Emily had reluctantly returned to Portland to arrange a leave of absence from her job. Only Linda from the hospital came to see me off, promising to visit when she could. My room at Riverside was small but bright, with a window overlooking a garden where patients in wheelchairs were sometimes taken on nice days. I shared the space with Barbara Jenkins, a 72-year-old former librarian who had suffered a stroke 3 weeks before mine. "Welcome to Stroke Prison," she'd quipped through her own slurred speech when the orderlies wheeled me in. "The food's terrible, but the physical therapy is worse." Barbara's dark humor became my first source of comfort in this strange new world. She was further along in recovery than I was, able to speak in short sentences and move her affected arms slightly. "It gets better," she assured me. "Not good, but better." My rehabilitation team introduced themselves on the first day. Dr. Simmons, the neurologist, was brisk and matter-of-fact, outlining my treatment plan without sugarcoating the challenges ahead. Teresa, my physical therapist, was a muscular woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense attitude. "I'm going to push you harder than you want to be pushed," she warned. "You'll probably hate me for it." Marcus, the speech therapist, was a gentle giant of a man with infinite patience. "We'll start with the basics," he explained. Swallowing, breathing control, then simple sounds. Olivia, my occupational therapist, was a cheerful young woman who specialized in helping patients relearn daily activities. "By the time we're done, you'll be making your own tea again," she promised. The initial assessments were humiliating and depressing. I scored near the bottom on every scale they used. My right side was almost completely paralyzed. I couldn't form words, only unintelligible sounds. Simple cognitive tests revealed the stroke had affected my processing speed and some memory functions. After the evaluation, I was left alone in my room, where I finally allowed myself to cry, real tears this time, not just the internal ones. That night, dark thoughts plagued me. Maybe Charlotte was right. What kind of life would this be? I thought of George, wondering if it might be easier to join him than to fight this impossible battle. The depth of my depression was unlike anything I'd experienced before. The next morning, Teresa arrived early. "Pity party's over," she announced, pulling back my curtains to let in the morning light. "Time to work." She positioned my right hand, moving each finger individually. "Try to wiggle your index finger," she instructed. I concentrated with all my might, staring at my hand, willing it to move. Nothing happened. "Again," she said, undeterred. We repeated this for what felt like hours. Just as I was ready to give up in frustration, my finger twitched slightly, barely visible, but definitely a movement. "There," Teresa exclaimed. "That was all you. Let's build on that." That tiny movement became my first victory, a fragile thread of hope to cling to. If I could move one finger, perhaps I could eventually move them all. The days at Riverside blurred together in a grueling routine. Mornings began with physical therapy, exercises to maintain muscle tone, attempts at small movements, later progressing to sitting up and eventually standing with assistance. Afternoons were split between speech therapy and occupational therapy. Evenings were for rest, though I often did extra finger exercises when no one was watching, determined to accelerate my progress. The pain was constant. Not just the physical discomfort of muscles being forced to work in new ways, but the emotional pain of failure after failure. I would try for an hour to pick up a block, only to have it slip from my grasp. I would practice a simple B sound hundreds of times with little improvement. The frustration was overwhelming, often leaving me in tears. Charlotte visited on Sundays, always bringing paperwork, insurance forms, house maintenance records, bank statements. We need to be practical about managing your affairs while you're indisposed, she'd say. She rarely addressed my recovery directly, as though she'd already decided it was a lost cause. Richard's visits were brief and uncomfortable. He'd sit beside my bed, making awkward small talk about the weather or sports, checking his phone constantly. The guilt was evident in his eyes, but he never acknowledged our last family meeting or his role in it. Emily was the only one who seemed to truly believe in my recovery. She called daily via video chat that the nurses would set up for me. She'd moved temporarily to a small apartment near my home, alternating between working remotely and visiting me. "You're getting stronger every day, Mom," she'd encourage. "I can see it." During her visits, she'd bring photos from home, tell me about the neighbors, read my favorite books aloud. She'd help with my exercises, celebrating each tiny improvement as though I'd climbed Mount Everest. Her faith in me became another reason to push myself harder. For weeks into rehabilitation, I met Barbara's children when they came to take her home. Her recovery had progressed remarkably. She was walking with a cane and speaking in full, if slow, sentences. "Don't give up, Dorothy," she told me before leaving. "If this old librarian can do it, so can you." With Barbara gone, my room felt emptier, lonelier. That night, Dr. Simmons stopped by with news that would change my trajectory. "Dorothy, there's a clinical trial for a new stroke recovery approach combining targeted neurostimulation with intensive therapy," he explained. "Given your type of stroke and current progress, you might be a good candidate. It's experimental, but showing promising results." When my children learned about the trial, their reactions were predictable. Charlotte and Richard opposed it immediately. "Experimental treatments are risky," Charlotte argued during a team meeting. "Who knows what side effects might develop?" Emily, meanwhile, researched the trial extensively. "The preliminary results are impressive," she countered. "The risks are minimal compared to the potential benefits." The decision ultimately rested with me, but my inability to communicate clearly complicated matters. Marcus, my speech therapist, worked intensively with me on a simple yes/no system: 1 blink for yes, 2 for no. Winder. Simmons formally asked if I wanted to participate in the trial. I blinked once, decisively. It was my first clear communication, my first autonomous decision since the stroke. "Yes, it is," Marcus confirmed, smiling broadly. "Dorothy wants to try the treatment." 2 days later, I began the trial. The neurostimulation involved non-invasive electrodes placed on specific areas of my scalp, combined with dramatically intensified therapy sessions. The regimen was exhausting, but within a week, I noticed differences. My right hand could now grasp objects briefly. I could produce simple sounds more consistently. I kept these improvements partially hidden from Charlotte and Richard during their visits, instinctively knowing I needed to protect my recovery from their doubts. With Emily and my therapists, however, I pushed myself to demonstrate every new ability. Small victories accumulated. Holding a spoon long enough to take a bite of applesauce. Standing for 30 seconds with minimal support. Forming the word yes audibly. Each achievement, however modest, fueled my determination for the next one. 6 weeks into my stay, I received a package from my book club friends, cards from each member, photos of the community garden in bloom, and a recorded message they'd created together. Nurse Melissa played it for me one evening. "We're tending your corner of the garden, Dorothy. Your daffodils are spectacular this year. The bench is empty without you. Come back to us soon." The connection to my former life, the reminder that I was still Dorothy Wilson, not just a stroke patient, reinvigorated my resolve. At night I had vivid dreams of gardening, of walking through my neighborhood, of baking George's favorite apple pie. These dreams weren't just escapism. They were rehearsals for the life I was fighting to reclaim. As my cognitive abilities improved, I began formulating a plan. If my children thought I was a helpless victim, unable to make my own decisions or protect myself, they were sorely mistaken. Dorothy Wilson had survived raising 3 children, 30 years of teaching teenagers, and losing the love of her life. A stroke wasn't going to defeat me, and neither was the betrayal of my own children. I had 8 weeks until the clinical trial ended. 8 weeks to prepare for what would come next. 8 weeks to become strong enough to take back control of my life. Every painful therapy session, every frustrating setback, every small victory now had a purpose beyond recovery itself. This wasn't just about healing my body anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my independence, and most importantly, my voice. At the 2-month mark after my stroke, the clinical trial began showing remarkable results. My right hand could now grasp objects with reasonable strength. I could stand with a walker for several minutes. Most significantly, I could speak in short, simple sentences, though my words were still slurred and sometimes came with great effort. "You're responding exceptionally well to the treatment," Dr. Simmons noted during our weekly evaluation. "Your brain is creating new neural pathways at an impressive rate." What Dr. Simmons didn't know was that I was pushing myself far beyond the official therapy sessions. When the night staff thought I was sleeping, I practiced tongue exercises Marcus had taught me. During rest periods, I continuously flexed and released my right hand under my blanket. I convinced the night nurse, Melissa, to bring me children's picture books that I used to practice reading aloud in whispered tones. My recovery wasn't just physical. As my speech improved, I began quietly putting my plan into action. During a session with the center's social worker, Jessica, I managed to communicate something important. "Need lawyer," I said haltingly. Jessica looked surprised. "A lawyer? Are you concerned about legal matters, Dorothy?" "Yes. Children." "Heard them. Stop treatment." Each word was a struggle, but I persisted. Understanding dawned on Jessica's face. "You overheard your children discussing stopping your treatment?" When I nodded, she continued gently. "And you want legal protection?" "Yes. Help, please." Jessica arranged for me to meet with Mr. Jenkins, my longtime family attorney, in private. She scheduled the appointment during hours when my children typically wouldn't visit, and listed it in my chart as a cognitive assessment, to avoid raising suspicions. Mr. Jenkins arrived 3 days later, shock evident on his face when he saw my condition. We had known each other for 30 years. He had handled George's will, our house purchase, everything legal in our lives. "Dorothy," he said, taking my left hand carefully, "Jessica explained some of your concerns. I'm here to help however I can." With painful slowness, I explained what I had overheard in the hospital, how Charlotte and Richard had been willing to end my treatment to preserve their inheritance. Mr. Jenkins took meticulous notes, his expression growing graver with each halting sentence I managed. "This is deeply troubling," he said when I finished. "You want to change your will and power of attorney?" "Yes. Protect myself." I gestured to the social worker. "Jessica, witness." Over the next hour we worked out the details. My previous will had divided my estate equally among my 3 children. The new version would be dramatically different. Emily would become my power of attorney and the executor of my estate. Charlotte and Richard would receive only token inheritances, with the bulk of my assets placed in educational trusts for my grandchildren and donations to stroke research and the community garden project. The house would eventually go to Emily, with the provision that I could live there as long as I was able. "I'll draw up the paperwork and return next week for your signature," Mr. Jenkins promised. "In the meantime, I'll help Jessica document your competency to make these decisions. We'll bring in an independent neuropsychologist to verify your cognitive abilities." With legal protection underway, I turned my attention to documenting what had happened. Working with Melissa and Jessica, I recorded my memories of the hospital conversation, my ongoing recovery, and my children's contrasting reactions to my progress. Teresa helped by keeping videos of my physical therapy sessions, creating a visual record of my improvement. My speech continued to improve dramatically. By the end of the second month, I could form complete sentences, though I still spoke slowly and sometimes struggled with certain sounds. My right leg had regained enough strength that I could walk short distances with a cane. My right arm and hand, while weaker than my left, could perform basic tasks like holding a cup or buttoning large buttons. My children's reactions to my progress were telling. Emily was ecstatic, celebrating each new achievement and constantly encouraging me to push further. "You're amazing, Mom," she would say. "Look how far you've come already." Charlotte's response was more complex. Initially skeptical, she seemed almost surprised by my improvements, as though she had genuinely expected me to remain incapacitated. Her visits became more frequent, her attention more focused on my therapy and less on my finances. I wondered if guilt had finally begun to seep through her pragmatic facade. Richard appeared genuinely relieved by my progress, though his visits remained brief and somewhat awkward. "You're looking great, Mom," he'd say with forced cheerfulness that couldn't quite hide his discomfort. What they didn't know was that I heard them talking in the hallway after one joint visit. I had been practicing walking with my therapist when they stepped out, thinking I couldn't hear them. "She's recovering too quickly," Charlotte said in a low voice. "We need to start thinking about what this means for us." "What are you suggesting?" Richard asked. "That we try to slow down her recovery? That's insane, Charlotte." "Of course not," she snapped. "But we need to secure our positions before she's fully independent again. She still needs our help. Once she doesn't." "She's our mother, not a business adversary," Richard replied, though without much conviction. Melissa, who had been helping me with my walking exercise, made eye contact with me. Without a word, she took out her phone and recorded the rest of their conversation. Later, she played it back for me and Jessica, adding it to our documentation. As the end of my time at Riverside approached, I worked with Dr. Simmons and Jessica to plan my discharge without my children's knowledge. Emily would be told, of course, but Charlotte and Richard would only be informed at the last minute. I didn't want them to have time to interfere. I also contacted my dear friend Mildred from the garden committee. "Would your garden apartment still be available?" I asked during a phone call Jessica helped me make. The small apartment above Mildred's garage had been vacant since her son moved out, and she had mentioned it to me months before my stroke. "For you?" "Absolutely," Mildred replied without hesitation. "When do you need it?" 2 weeks, I said. "But secret. Surprise for kids." Mildred chuckled. "Your secret's safe with me, Dorothy. I'll have it ready." Everything was falling into place. My final assessments showed remarkable improvement across all areas. Dr. Simmons called it one of the most successful recoveries he'd seen in his career. While I still had deficits, my speech was slower than before, my right side weaker, my endurance limited. I had regained enough function to live independently with minimal assistance. The night before my discharge, I sat in my room looking out at the garden where I had taken my first steps with the walker weeks earlier. The journey had been the hardest of my life, physically painful, emotionally devastating, mentally exhausting. Yet somehow I felt stronger than I had before the stroke. Adversity hadn't broken me. It had revealed a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. Tomorrow would bring confrontation and likely more pain. But it would also bring justice and the reclaiming of my autonomy. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought of George. "I'm still fighting, my love," I whispered. "And tomorrow I win." Discharge day dawned bright and clear. I dressed myself in clothes Emily had brought from home. A blue blouse and comfortable slacks, a far cry from the hospital gowns and rehabilitation center sweatpants I'd worn for months. My hair had been washed and styled by one of the kind nurses, and I'd even applied a touch of lipstick. I wanted to look like myself when I faced my children, not like a patient. Emily arrived mid-morning, her face glowing with excitement. "Ready to go home, Mom?" "Not home," I said carefully, having practiced this conversation. "Need to stop at Mr. Jenkins' office first." Emily looked puzzled but didn't question me. "Whatever you need. I took the whole day off to help you settle in." Dr. Simmons reviewed my discharge instructions one last time, reminding me about medication schedules and outpatient therapy appointments. "You've made remarkable progress, Dorothy," he said warmly. "But remember, recovery continues for months, even years. Don't push too hard too fast." I nodded, thanking him and each member of my rehabilitation team. They had become like family over these past months, witnesses to both my struggle and my determination. Saying goodbye was harder than I had anticipated. As Emily wheeled me out to her car, hospital policy required the wheelchair, though I could walk with my cane, I asked her to make a call. Please tell Charlotte and Richard meet us at Jenkins' law office. 3 o'clock. Important discussion. About care arrangements. Emily raised an eyebrow but made the calls. Charlotte initially protested, citing a client meeting, but Emily's insistence that it was extremely important eventually convinced her. Richard agreed immediately, perhaps sensing an opportunity to make amends. We arrived at Mr. Jenkins' office early. His receptionist, Nancy, greeted me with a warm hug. "Wonderful to see you up and about, Dorothy," she said, leading us to the conference room. "Mr. Jenkins will be with you shortly." The conference room was formal but comfortable, with a large oak table and leather chairs. Emily helped me settle into one at the head of the table, placing my cane within easy reach. Mr. Jenkins joined us, reviewing our strategy one last time while we waited for the others. At precisely 3 o'clock, Nancy showed Charlotte and Richard in. Their expressions when they saw me sitting at the head of the table dressed in street clothes, alert and composed, were priceless. Charlotte recovered quickly, her lawyer's mask slipping back into place as she took a seat. Richard looked genuinely pleased, if confused about the setting. "Mom, you look amazing," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. "But what are we doing here? I thought we were discussing home care arrangements." "We are discussing arrangements," I said carefully, my speech deliberate but clear. "My arrangements." Charlotte's eyes narrowed as she glanced between me and Mr. Jenkins. "What's going on here?" I took a deep breath, centering myself for what would come next. The speech I had practiced for weeks flowed more smoothly than any word since my stroke. 3 months ago, I had a stroke. While in hospital, I heard you both telling Dr. Patterson to stop my treatment. I paused, letting the words sink in. "You thought I couldn't hear. You were wrong." The color drained from Richard's face. Charlotte remained impassive, though a muscle twitched in her jaw. "You said I wouldn't want to live like this. You worried about selling my house for care, about burning through your inheritance." Each phrase was delivered with quiet intensity, my eyes moving between them. "Mom, you don't understand," Charlotte began. "We were just concerned about your quality of life, what you would have wanted." I held up my hand to stop her. "Mr. Jenkins, play recording, please." Mr. Jenkins pressed play on a small recorder. The voices of Charlotte and Richard filled the room, their conversation outside my rehabilitation room crystal clear. "She's recovering too quickly. We need to start thinking about what this means for us." As the recording continued, Richard buried his face in his hands. Charlotte's professional composure cracked slightly, her lips pressing into a thin line. When the recording ended, I continued. "I heard everything. In hospital. In rehab. Everything." My voice grew stronger with each word, fueled by months of pent-up hurt and betrayal. "You wanted me gone. Or at least, incapacitated. Easier to control my money." "That's not fair," Charlotte protested. "You're taking things out of context. We were under tremendous stress, worried sick about you." "Worried about my money," I corrected her. "Not me." Richard looked up, tears in his eyes. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I was worried about the store, about the twins' tuition. I let that cloud my judgment, but I never truly wanted to stop your treatment. I was just scared and selfish." His honesty was unexpected, and I felt a tiny crack in my resolve. But I had come too far to back down now. "I've changed my will," I announced. "Mr. Jenkins has the documents." Mr. Jenkins slid copies across the table. "These changes have been properly executed, with Dorothy undergoing comprehensive cognitive assessment to verify her competency," he explained in his professional tone. "The changes are legally binding." Charlotte skimmed the document, her face hardening. "This is ridiculous. You're disinheriting us because of something you think you heard while medicated and confused." "Not think. No," I replied firmly. "And not disinheriting completely. Abigail, Benjamin, and Brian have educational trusts. You and Richard receive token amounts. Emily is executor and receives the house, eventually. I'll contest this, Charlotte said immediately. You're clearly not in your right mind. Mr. Jenkins smiled thinly. You're welcome to try, Charlotte. We have extensive documentation of Dorothy's cognitive abilities, multiple witnesses to your conversations about stopping treatment, and concerns about her recovery being too quick, and of course, the recordings. Do you really want all of that presented in court? Charlotte's face flushed with anger. You can't do this. After everything I've done, managing your affairs, looking out for your interests. Your interests, I corrected. Not mine. I turned to Richard. You both showed me who you really are, when it mattered most. Richard nodded slowly, tears streaming down his face. You're right, Mom. I don't deserve your forgiveness. But please know I am truly deeply sorry. Charlotte stood abruptly. This is absurd. I'm calling Gerald. Gerald Hoffman was her colleague, a specialist in contested wills. We'll see how this holds up under proper legal scrutiny. Do what you must, I replied calmly. I've done what I must. As Charlotte stormed out, Richard lingered, his expression tortured. Mom, I know I don't deserve it, but is there any way I can make this right? I looked at my son, my middle child, who had always been quick to make mistakes and quicker to seek forgiveness. That depends on what you do next, not what you say. He nodded, understanding the implication. I'll prove myself to you again somehow. I promise. He squeezed my hand gently before following his sister out. After they left, Emily turned to me, her expression a mixture of shock and admiration. Mom, I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me what they said in the hospital? Needed to handle myself, I explained. You had enough burden already. The meeting had drained me, and I was suddenly exhausted. Emily noticed immediately. Let's get you settled in. Where are we going? Back to the house. I smiled. No. Surprise. Mildred's garden apartment. 20 minutes later, we pulled up to Mildred's charming Victorian home. The garden apartment above her detached garage had its own entrance via an external staircase, which would be good exercise for my recovering legs. Mildred herself was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, beaming. Welcome home, Dorothy, she called, coming forward to embrace me. Everything's ready upstairs. With Emily's help, I made my way up the stairs, taking them slowly but steadily. When I reached the top and Emily unlocked the door, I gasped in delight. The small apartment had been transformed. My favorite armchair from home sat by the window overlooking Mildred's magnificent garden. Photos of George and happier family times adorned the walls. A vase of fresh daffodils, my favorites, brightened the kitchen table. Mildred and I moved some of your things over yesterday, Emily explained. Just the essentials for now. We can get more later. I moved slowly through the space, touching familiar objects, reacquainting myself with pieces of my former life. It wasn't my house, but it was a safe haven. A place to continue healing without the constant reminder of betrayal that my own home would now represent. As evening approached, Emily ordered dinner from my favorite Italian restaurant. As we ate, she finally asked the question that had clearly been bothering her. Are you really never going to forgive them, Mom? I considered the question carefully, not wanting to give a hasty answer. Not never, I finally said. But not soon. Need time to heal all wounds. Not just stroke. Emily nodded, understanding. I still can't believe they would say those things. Do those things. People show true selves. In crisis, I replied. You showed yours too. Loyal. Loving. She blushed at the compliment. I just did what any daughter would do. No, I said firmly. Not any daughter. You. After dinner, exhaustion overtook me completely. The emotional toll of the day had been enormous. Emily helped me prepare for bed, promising to return in the morning. Alone in my new bedroom, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of everything that had happened. The stroke, the betrayal, the confrontation, the uncertain future. The tears came freely now, a release of months of stored emotion. My phone buzzed with messages from Charlotte and Richard that I wasn't ready to read. Instead, I opened my bedside drawer and took out the photo of George I'd asked Emily to bring. His kind eyes seemed to look directly into mine, understanding without words the complexity of what I was feeling. "I did it, George," I whispered. "I fought back. I survived." I traced his face with my fingertip. "But it hurts. Losing them hurts almost as much as the stroke." As I drifted toward sleep, I realized that while one recovery was nearing completion, another was just beginning. The body could heal faster than the heart, but both, given time and care, could find their way back to wholeness. 6 months after my stroke, my new life had taken on comfortable rhythms. My garden apartment became a sanctuary, small enough to manage with my lingering limitations, but spacious enough to not feel confined. The large windows overlooking Mildred's garden provided constant inspiration and a connection to the outside world even on days when my energy was low. My physical recovery continued through outpatient therapy 3 times a week. My right hand had regained about 80% of its former dexterity, enough to cook simple meals and tend to the container garden I'd started on my small balcony. My walk was still slightly uneven, but I rarely used the cane except on particularly tired days. My speech, while slower than before, was clear and fluid most of the time, with only occasional word-finding difficulties when I was fatigued. The apartment community, primarily occupied by other retirees, provided unexpected friendship and support. Wednesday afternoon tea with Mildred, Eleanor from across the street, and Susan from the downstairs apartment became a weekly highlight. These women, all widows like myself, understood the complex journey of rebuilding a life after loss, though my losses had been more varied than most. 3 months after moving in, I felt strong enough to return to the community garden. Thomas, the new coordinator, had kept my plot flourishing in my absence. "We couldn't let your roses suffer," he explained, showing me the careful pruning and feeding schedule the committee had maintained, with some adaptations for my reduced stamina. A rolling garden seat, raised beds, and lightweight tools. I resumed my role, finding healing in the familiar feel of soil between my fingers. My book club welcomed me back with tears and hugs. We shifted our focus from contemporary fiction to memoirs about overcoming adversity, each selection sparking deep discussions about resilience and transformation. Being among these friends who had known me before, who saw me as Dorothy rather than a stroke survivor, helped restore my sense of identity beyond my medical experience. The situation with my children remained complicated. Charlotte maintained her distance, occasionally sending formal emails through her assistant about legal matters she insisted needed addressing. True to her threat, she had consulted with Gerald Hoffman about contesting the will, but after reviewing the evidence Mr. Jenkins had compiled, even Gerald advised against proceeding. The coldness of her response hurt deeply, but I refused to let it dominate my thoughts. I allowed supervised visits with Abigail, Benjamin, and Brian. These grandchildren were innocent in the conflict between their parents and me, and I wouldn't punish them for their parents' actions. Charlotte would drop Abigail off with her nanny, avoiding direct contact with me. Richard would bring the twins himself, waiting awkwardly in the car during their visits. Richard's journey toward reconciliation began 3 months after our confrontation. He arrived at my apartment one evening unannounced, looking nervous but determined. "Mom, I've been seeing a therapist," he said, perched on the edge of my sofa. "I'm trying to understand why I acted the way I did, why I was willing to sacrifice your well-being for financial security." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture reminiscent of his father. "It's not an excuse, but I want you to know I'm working on becoming someone worthy of your trust again." His sincerity touched me. While I wasn't ready to fully welcome him back into my life, I agreed to monthly dinners where we could slowly rebuild our relationship. His business had failed shortly after my discharge, ironically making the inheritance he'd been so concerned about a moot point. But he'd found a job managing a sporting goods chain store, and seemed more at peace with his reduced circumstances. Emily remained my rock. After my confrontation with Charlotte and Richard, she decided to relocate permanently, finding a social work position at a local children's hospital. She visited several times a week, helping with shopping, accompanying me to medical appointments, or simply sharing a cup of tea and conversation. Our relationship deepened in ways I hadn't thought possible, evolving from mother-daughter to a true friendship between equals. 4 months after my discharge, I joined a stroke survivors support group at the recommendation of Dr. Simmons. Hearing others' stories, some of triumph, some of ongoing struggle, provided perspective and community. During my third meeting, the facilitator asked if I would share my recovery journey. "Your story is remarkable," she said. "Not just the physical recovery, but how you advocated for yourself. It could help so many others." Initially reluctant, I eventually agreed. The response was overwhelming. Other survivors and their families approached me afterward, asking questions, seeking advice, finding hope in my experience. One woman tearfully told me her family had been discussing ending her husband's rehabilitation, but after hearing my story, they would continue supporting his recovery. This unexpected impact led me to start a video blog, Second Chances, documenting my ongoing recovery and offering encouragement to other stroke survivors and their families. My first video, awkwardly filmed on Emily's phone, received thousands of views within days. Media outlets picked up the story, leading to interviews with local news, and eventually a feature in a national magazine about patient advocacy. In September, 6 months after leaving Riverside, I was invited to testify before a state legislative committee considering a bill to strengthen patient rights and communication protocols for semi-conscious patients. Standing at the podium, my voice strong and clear, I told my story publicly for the first time. "I was conscious when my children discussed ending my treatment," I testified. "I heard every word but couldn't respond. How many other patients experience this? How many families make decisions without realizing their loved ones can hear and understand? We need protocols ensuring medical staff regularly inform families that hearing often remains intact, even when patients cannot respond." The bill passed unanimously, becoming known informally as Dorothy's Law. The sense of purpose this advocacy provided helped heal the lingering emotional wounds from my children's betrayal, transforming a painful experience into something that could protect others. During this period of advocacy work, I reconnected with Dr. Patterson from the hospital. "I've followed your recovery with great interest," he told me over coffee. "You've become something of a legend among my colleagues, the patient who heard everything, recovered, and changed the system." I thanked him for refusing to stop my treatment despite my children's pressure. "You followed your medical ethics when it would have been easier not to. You gave me the chance to fight back." As my advocacy expanded, I began volunteering at Riverside once a week, visiting new stroke patients to offer encouragement and practical advice. Seeing the fear in their eyes, the same fear I had experienced, and being able to show them recovery was possible became one of the most rewarding aspects of my new life. Throughout this journey, I often thought of George, wondering what he would make of everything that had happened. During one particularly difficult night, missing him acutely, I dreamed he was sitting at the foot of my bed. "You did exactly what I knew you would, dream," George said with his familiar gentle smile. "You fought back. You always were the stronger one." I woke with tears on my face, but a sense of peace in my heart. George had known my strength even when I hadn't recognized it myself. On the 1-year anniversary of my stroke, Emily organized a small celebration in Mildred's garden. Susan and Eleanor came, along with several friends from the book club and garden committee. To my surprise, Richard arrived with the twins and a large wrapped package. "The boys and I made this for you," he said, as the children eagerly helped me unwrap it. Inside was a beautifully crafted wooden bench for my container garden, with a small brass plaque reading for Mom, who taught us what strength really means. The gesture brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you," I said, embracing my son. "It's perfect." Charlotte had been invited, but sent her regrets via email. While the hurt of her continued distance remained, I had come to accept that reconciliation might take years, if it happened at all. I had left the door open, but walking through it would be her choice, not mine. The celebration was simple but meaningful. A cake decorated with the daffodils I loved, cards from well-wishers who couldn't attend, a toast to new beginnings proposed by Mildred. As I looked around at these people who had supported me through the most challenging year of my life, I felt a profound gratitude. Emily had one last surprise. "I've been offered a promotion," she announced. "Director of Social Services at the Children's Hospital. It means I'm staying permanently." The news completed my joy. Having Emily nearby had been a blessing I hadn't dared hope would continue. As the party wound down and guests departed, I remained in the garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in vivid pinks and oranges. The stroke had nearly taken everything from me, my independence, my dignity, my life itself. The betrayal of my children had wounded me in ways the stroke never could. Yet somehow, through all of it, I had emerged not just surviving, but transformed. The stroke had been both the worst thing and, strangely, one of the best things to happen to me. It had stripped away pretense, revealed true character, and ultimately led me to a life with deeper purpose and more authentic relationships than I had known before. The path had been unimaginably difficult, but the destination held its own unexpected beauty. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, I made my way back to my apartment, moving slowly but steadily on my own 2 feet, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. If you've experienced family betrayal or a major health crisis, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. How did you find the strength to overcome? Remember to like this video if my journey resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories of resilience and recovery, and share with anyone who might need encouragement during difficult times. Thank you for walking this path with me today, and remember, it's never too late for a second chance.